recording? Yes, okay, there we go. So for agenda today, it may look familiar to some of you who joined the pre-proposal session. So it's mostly the same with a couple updates around some of the tips, and I cut out I cut out the information about the pre-proposal since now we're in the full proposal stage. So we'll just do a quick recap on the goals of BSK, or Best Starts for Kids Capital, since I know some of you, this may be your first time joining an info session. Some quick details about the RFP, which is also written in the RFP that's posted, minimum qualifications for what we're looking for in a proposal, and some general tips on how to apply, which will include a tutorial for Zoom Grants, which is the platform we're using for this solicitation. Leslie will share some updates on what we'll be using, what DCHS will be using going forward. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, and we'll go ahead and get us started. I think you should all be aware of this at this point, but just as a reminder, this specific RFP is for priority 1, which is one of 4 priorities under the Best Starts for Kids Capital Implementation Plan. That means that it's specifically for the construction or renovation of existing property or new facility to provide new community or recreational centers that prioritize serving low-income BIPOC children, youth, and families who lack access to similar services. There is a maximum cap for any single project of $5 million over the life of the levy. And so, for example, if you had applied and been awarded in the previous round, we could not award you an amount that exceeds the $5 million total between maybe your first award and the second award. And similarly, if this is your first time applying, you cannot request more than $5 million. And then for capital planning grants, so that's for no construction activities, it's just for pre-construction planning related activities, that is capped at $100,000. Right. And the total pool of funding currently available is around $20 million. That is dependent on the levy funds that are collected from year to year, but that's sort of what we had forecast at the end of 2025. The applications are due March 13th, 2026, so in just over a month. In terms of how long, if you're awarded, the contract period the contract is signed for, it's typically longer than a year just because of the timeline of construction projects. If it's a planning project, for example, it may be a little bit shorter, or if you're further along in the construction process, but that may be a little bit different for some of you who may be familiar with the service contracts awarded through the department. But yeah, we have a longer timeline typically for these contracts. And then, yeah, just repeating again, there's a cap of $100,000 for planning grants and $5 million for the construction projects. And so just the timeline after you've submitted on the 13th, and just to flag, that's 2 p.m. Pacific time, not the end of the day. That sometimes surprises people, but that's so that we have time to deal with if there's any, so there's still someone available if there's any kind of last minute questions or technical issues that come up. So we do set that deadline a little bit before close of business. And I would please encourage you, if you have any technical issues, to reach out as early as possible, and first to Zoom Grants, who are they provide the application platform, so they would be the first port of call. But if you're not hearing back from them, or if it's getting really close to the deadline, you can reach out to Leslie, who is the RFP lead. And then the goal is to review applications between when they're submitted and early May. That is a little bit dependent on the reviewer schedules. So, if some of them can't make that time and they need an extension, it may take a little bit longer than that, but we're aiming to do the review within roughly a 5 to 6 week window. And then there's an internal review process within the county. But we have something called the decision team that has to review the recommendations from the review team before final decisions are made for the awards. And then both the selected and non-selected proposers should be notified sometime between June and early July. I will pause there because I provide a lot of just sort of the logistical details on the RFP. Anyone have any questions yet at this point? Okay, I don't see any hands. And so for the scoring, we have five different categories, and then within that, there's different specific criteria that we're looking at. So we'll be looking at the feasibility and scope of the project, the proposed budget, an organization's experience, capacity and experience, which communities are served, and the organization, the project's commitment to equity, racial, and social justice. They're weighted between, sorry, there's a maximum of 5 possible points for each of the criteria. There are different weightings. So you'll see the weightings in the column on the left, and then the maximum total weighted points on the right-hand column. Um, and so the highest score that could be received is 145 points. I do want to note, sorry, going back slide, while we do use the scoring as, of course, a guideline to look at the strongest proposals, it is not necessarily the final determining factor by the decision team. For example, one of the things that we look at that isn't necessarily scored is geographic distribution of projects. So that is a consideration that comes into play in terms of the decision making. So that just is for everyone's awareness. It's not purely determined just based on the score. Of course, that is important in terms of how we make decisions, but I just want to make that clear. That's also described in the RFP as well. So for the project to qualify, I don't think I need to go over this as much because at this point we've gone through the pre-proposals. So at this point, all of the projects that we've approved for the full proposal should meet the project type, and the requests were within the maximum allowable budget. But other things that the facility has to be located in King County, and there has to be a clear indication of serving different communities that are prioritized through the Best Starts for Kids program. And then this is maybe helpful as you're trying to work on your application and thinking about things that might strengthen your application, is if you can demonstrate that your facility is multi-use, has intergenerational programming. It's not required, but it's desired to have if you have an outdoor space for it to be covered so it can be used year round, and to be able to demonstrate if you have previously, for example, done a capital project or renovation and can show that you've been able to pull together a design, architecture, engineering team. I think someone might not be on mute. I'm hearing some crinkling. Yeah. Um, and then also, if you can demonstrate that you have systems in place, like a strong financial system, that you may have some ability to report on performance measurements. These are all things that are not required, but kind of show sort of how strong of a project and team that you have that you're bringing forward. And then this is something to keep in mind as you're developing the budget. There are certain activities that are ineligible under the grant. So we cannot pay for non-construction materials and equipment. An example of this is we have had questions in the past. Can I buy furniture for this playroom in this childcare center, or some other play equipment for the rec center? And we cannot purchase any sort of materials of that nature. We also cannot pay for retroactive funding. So that means that if you've already done the work, for example, and you're trying to get reimbursed for it through this grant, at this point, you cannot ask for funding for work that was done in 2025, for example. We also can't cover transportation and travel costs for staff or sort of general operating expenses like staffing costs or salaries. We can't provide emergency funding or pay for mortgage or utility bills either. So those are some of the ineligible activities. And so with the proposal, there are 16 questions. Hopefully, if you've had a chance to look at those, you can bring some of your questions if you have any on the questions that are there. They're all published in Zoom grants, and highly recommend if you haven't done so to just go through all of the attachments that are in the library tab, which include the budget template. There are 2 worksheets for that, so keep that in mind where you're completing it. The timeline, technical assistance information, that's more, it's not anything you have to fill out, but if you're looking for technical assistance to get some guidance on how to complete the proposal or how to develop a strong proposal, that is a service available to all applicants. So you can read that document over and actually reach out to some of our technical assistant consultants for assistance. Um, and then for properties that are leased, we'll need the property owner certification of work. The scoring guide, which I just described briefly to you, is just for informational purposes. So those are all available in the library tab. And then you'll also, there's certain attachments that will have to be submitted for the application to be considered complete. So we'll need financials, an organizational chart, staff resumes. We don't necessarily need resumes for every single person in your organization, but for example, someone would be the project manager, maybe executive director, the staff who would kind of be the lead for this project. And then site control, um, and the site plan and site photos are all documents that we request. If you have any questions again about how to submit, please send questions to Zoom grants as early as you can in advance. And if it really comes down to the wire and you're struggling to submit, you can email the proposal directly to Leslie, the RFP lead, but please only use that as a last resort. We prefer to be able to have everything documented in Zoom grants. Um, I do see a question in the chat. Since it's there, I think I can answer it now. Is staff time dedicated to work under a planning grant an allowable cost? So I think if I'm understanding that correctly, we can't really cover. So it's someone who's like a regular staff person, let's say like full-time staff, we can't really say, okay, we're gonna pay, 30% of their hours and fringe benefits. That's not how this grant is designed. It's really for um just that specific project. So for example, you could pay for a consultant who is helping to do the planning. But we can't, take timesheets and say, okay, yes, we're going to pay for X number of hours plus the fringe benefit. That's not how this grant is set up. I hope that answers your question, Robert. Um, And then, yeah, I think I'm sounding like a broken record, but we just have had this issue before that people are not reading all of the documents in the library tab. So please just be sure to go through all the documents in Zoom Grants Library. If you don't know where to find that, Leslie will demonstrate it on the demo that we're going to show of Zoom Grants. And then, as I mentioned, please submit the grants, the applications in Zoom Grants if you can, and only send it by email if it's sort of down to the wire and you can't seem to solve a Zoom grants technical issue. And we will be, as a reminder, we will be posting Addendums include responses to questions and answers, or if there's been any changes in the RFP, say, for example, we end up changing a deadline or something, that would be posted on Zoom grants as an addendum that can be downloaded. We also try to send out emails email notifications as well. In terms of the guidelines, yes, they are all available through on the RFP. It has the guidelines around ineligible activities. I'll also be sharing this deck. We can include it in the next addendum. And then this is just some kind of general advice on the application for, how to complete the application and also kind of try and avoid some of the mistakes we've seen in the past. So I would definitely recommend to carefully review the scoring guide so you can see what's weighted the most and kind of what differentiates a really good response from just, let's say, a sort of, like what's the response that gets you a full 5 points versus just 3 points, let's say. So we do include examples of that in the scoring guide, which I believe is attachment G in the library tab. Um, and this is something that I've just done when I've applied for grants in the past. I would recommend first checking for completeness. So it's kind of like the easy make sure you don't get disqualified for missing an attachment. Make sure you've responded clearly to the question and look back at the examples in the scoring guide. And then after that, after you've done the completeness check, kind of go through and do the refinement of, okay, we've done the basic, we've completed everything. Are there places that we could strengthen our response? And the review panel will be using the scoring rubric when they do the scoring, and it will go through a formal review process, as I mentioned. And there is an appeals process if that happens to come up that is outlined in the RFP. And some additional tips, I definitely recommend if you would like um, to reach out to the technical assistance consultants. I've heard from other applicants and awardees in the past that they've been really helpful. Particularly, for example, if you've never applied for a public grant, that may be helpful just for them to be able to give you general tips. They are not grant writers, so that's something to keep in mind. They're not going to write the proposal for you, but they can provide guidance on how to answer questions, maybe suggest data that could help strengthen your responses. Um, and they can help you look over to see if, okay, maybe does this response really answer the question? And they do provide support in multiple languages. So if you have staff for whom English is not their first language for participating, we can get technical assistance that is available in multiple languages. Um, and sorry, I see a couple more questions coming in. We can't, we can't pay the person who's interning courting. That's right. We cannot pay, I'll just say this again, we cannot pay general staff costs. So we can't pay for staff time, travel, things like that with the grant funds. Because just so the differentiation is we look at that as a general operating cost. So that's your staff person, that's part of your operating cost. So that is not covered by the grant. And I said this earlier, but just to repeat that, the budget form includes both a project budget worksheet and then there's a second worksheet that describes the source of funds. For example, if you have other funds like a commerce grant, we'd like to see what other funds you may already have. So please complete both of those sheets in the budget form. For the timeline, we're not going to hold you to that necessarily if things change, say, for example, between when you submit the application in March and then by the time the award is made in June. We understand that some things are unpredictable, especially with construction timelines, and that may have changed. That will not be held against you, but just provide the best estimate of what you think the milestones will be and the spend down timelines. And the budget should be developed for the entire length of the contract term. So if your project is anticipated to be for a whole year, please develop the budget for the entire year. Um, and you can include, as I mentioned, consultant costs for the capital project. For example, if you and your staff are not normally responsible for managing facilities improvements, it may be beneficial to add in a budget line for a professional, let's say real estate property capital project manager to assist. And we have seen that in the past, and that is a cost that we could cover since it's just specifically for their work on that project. Um, and then the final kind of tips is that you can apply. It's not necessarily going to help you or hurt you, but if you wanted to apply as a partnership, you can do that. But you'd have to indicate, which budget is for which organization, and who the lead organization would be. And then we're going to ask, and you'll see it in the questions, for narrative proposal responses, we'd ask that you include very specific examples of work that your organization has done rather than speaking in generalities. Something I also suggest, just from my own experience, is that you may want to draft your responses outside of Zoom grants and then copy and paste it in rather than trying to type directly into Zoom grants. It's not necessarily the easiest editor to use, but just keep in mind the character limits that you'll see next to each question. So I will pause there since I, again, gave a lot of information on just some tips on applying. A question came in, if a project has received BSK planning grant funds already, would they have an advantage when requesting for capital funds? No, that's not something we necessarily would consider as an advantage or a disadvantage necessarily, other than the fact that we will at least have known, have seen what the project is there before, but it's not something that's necessarily going to be scored. I would say that if you can show, again, like in terms of going back to the criteria, the feasibility of your project. So if you've already done some planning work prior to applying, and you can show us that you've already made good progress and that your project is in a really good place to start construction, that's definitely advantageous. So I wouldn't say that because a project has had funds before that they would be at necessarily advantage or a disadvantage. Hopefully that answers your question, Michelle. All right. If we don't have any more questions on just sort of general tips for applying, I will pass it over to Leslie, who's going to start screen sharing. This is just a screenshot of what you should see when you log into Zoom Grants. And Leslie's going to take you through just navigating what the proposal looks like, how you can submit attachments, things like that. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, so Sophia mentioned a little while ago that it's really important to check the library. And I just wanted to point out that, since the pre-application was open, we've had 4 addendum. And so you definitely, and we'll have number 5 will be uploaded for with the list of all the questions and responses from today's session. And there will be, the recording will be posted. It will not be posted immediately. So I just wanted to make a note that that does go through a process internally with our communications team, but we would expect that later in the week to be available. So all of you accessed Zoom grants in order to do your pre-application, but did want to give an opportunity if anyone had any questions. But just as a reminder that you won't be able to submit a full application if you did not be determined to be eligible with the review of all the pre-proposals. So here are the questions under proposal questions that Sophia mentioned. I do want to kind of underscore what the point of crafting your responses, in a Word document or somewhere else, and then copying and pasting them in is an excellent idea. And don't spend any time with formatting. The more formatting there is, the trickier it is to be able to copy and paste without any troubles. So just want you to be mindful of that. And then there is a separate tab after, where you will be uploading all of your documents. And so those are the main pages. I also just kind of want to take a moment to step back from this proposal and just do want to make a pointing out that this could be your last application that you ever complete in Zoom grants for the King County, most likely for all of the brand new applications are all going to be through our Agiloft portal. And an agency needs to have at least one staff member with an Agiloft account to be able to access any of the solicitation materials and submit. So I just wanted to highlight this, and I'm putting this link into the chat right now. So just wanted to, because it takes a few days, I didn't want anyone to miss the opportunity of being able to apply for an opportunity that they would like to do so. So again, because this RFP, the pre-proposal process started in in 2025 in December, this RFP does stay within Zoom grants. But for example, if your agency was looking to submit for the fourth priority, which is in the mid-year, it would need to be done within Agiloft. So, and then the other item I wanted to highlight, this is in the RFP guidelines, but just want to underscore that in order to contract with DCHS, you need to provide evidence of certain coverages that you have through your insurance, as well as additional insured endorsements naming King County. For example, for commercial general liability and others. So again, putting a link into the chat right now. And there's a lot of information in here regarding requirements, and just want to point out that you will want to, not all of these will apply. So for example, cyber liability would not apply. Crime insurance wouldn't apply. Fidelity. So it's specific to the activities within the scope of work. But because these are capital, I wanted to go all the way down at the bottom. Builder's risk and contractor's pollution liability could be relevant. And so just want to make sure that you have a chance to look at those. And one last time, I really want to underscore not waiting to the last minute. It is so, so very important, especially because in this case, you're not just like hitting a button and submitting your questions. There are a lot of documents that you need to upload. And so you just please, if you can do it before the last day, really recommend it. The more traffic there is in Zoom grants, the slower it can be. So please apply before the last day. Thank you.
And I know we had some questions before if you're not familiar with Zoom grants. If you go to documents, that's where you would do the attachments and you can see, I believe all the attachments you have on there are required, but if they weren't, you could see which ones are required. And I don't think you'd be able to submit without at least uploading something. You could technically upload a blank document. I would not recommend that, but for required documents, you have to upload something in the attachment to be able to submit. Um, any questions on Zoom grants or any of the sort of forward-looking things that Leslie mentioned? Not seeing any questions. All right. All right, we went over this for future funding opportunities. And just to note, I know Leslie shared some helpful resources. That is all for, future RFPs. So, this RFP will still be done in Zoom grants, and the contract insurance requirements, we only need those if you're awarded, in order to do contracting. We're not requesting the insurance requirements as part of the application at this point. All right, so I didn't see any questions about the how to apply in Zoom grants, so we can move into the Q&A session. Just a few notes on this. In terms of the Q&A, the written answers are what you should look to, so what will come out in the addendums. We'll do our best to answer your questions on the spot here, but the written responses that will come out with the addendum will be sort of the final say in terms of any of the questions coming in. And then we'll be sending that out, hopefully, depending on when the video is published, maybe the end of the week or early next week. And we'll include the stack and the recording, as well as questions received in the information session and any written questions that have been submitted. I don't have it pulled up, but I believe we're accepting questions through, I don't know if you have that handy, Leslie, but we should still be accepting
It's a
questions.
yeah, it's about a week. We
Okay, one more
close
week
Q&A in a week ahead of time in order to have time to
respond.
respond and
Okay,
upload everything.
so we should be taking questions up to probably like the first week of March. But that exact date should be written in the RFP. All right, with that, do we have any questions? If you're not comfortable speaking, you don't have to come off camera, or you're also welcome to just type your question in the chat. I don't think I see any hands. And I'm not seeing, did I answer all the questions in the chat? I think so. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending. Really appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing your applications. And please feel free to send questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.